I'm sitting on the cold stone in the hot sun with a broken rope around my neck. The rest of the rope hangs from a beam high above me, and as I'm sitting there with a bit of a dent in my ego and a dull pain deep in my butt, watching the gray lory picking away at the last fig on the one tree in my small garden, all I'm thinking is, I'm still alive. Failed again. Now, I know it's a bit of a depressing way to begin the story, but don't worry, it's going to get a lot better now. It's going to be a lot more fun, right? My name is Michael, and I am a recovering addict. I used marijuana a lot for a number of years. And the addiction I'm here to talk about today, though, is not that addiction, but my addiction to myself. That day was actually one of the best days of my life because it was the day that I got into recovery. And right after the event I just described to you, my friends took me to a rehab in the mountains, in the Underberg Mountains on the way to Durban. Beautiful place. And I spent a few weeks there thinking about how I'd gotten to this place in my life. Beautiful nature and trees. As I walked around in the woods each day, after a few days, the trees sort of seemed to start whispering this: innovate yourself. Innovate yourself. Now, I was already teaching creativity and innovation at that point. I knew a few things about it. You know, innovation is hard, right? Out there in the world outside us, innovation doesn't work. Something like 95%, they say, of product innovations fail. There was a study done last year by McKinsey and Company showing that 94% of leaders in companies didn't think their innovation programs work. Basically, innovation is tough. Right? But what do I mean by innovate yourself? Well, it has something to do with the moon. See, when John Kennedy stood in front of 30,000 people, about 60 years ago, a couple months back, and declared that we would put boots on the moon within that same decade, he launched what is probably still the most concerted group innovation campaign in the history of humankind. Right? Getting people to the moon. At that time, it was impossible. It's still a metaphor for the impossible, isn't it? Even though we've done it for 50 years, a moonshot innovation is the one you'll never get, right? The one you really want. So what I want you to do for a moment is just get clear for yourself, what is your moonshot innovation? That innovation outside yourself, that thing that you'd like to achieve in your life, that you think you probably won't, or maybe you're trying and struggling with it now, or maybe you've never even set out to do it because you're so afraid it will fail. Now, failure is a bit of a funny word in the first place, right? When we say innovations fail, one of the things we forget to realize is that failure is a judgment. For example, a very famous story about Thomas Edison. Took 10,000 experiments to invent the light bulb and said he didn't fail once. He discovered 10,000 successful ways not to invent the light bulb, right? Now, looking at 95% failure in innovation, looking at 10,000 failures in the light bulb, you can start to feel better. I did about my own life, my own failures. So keep that moonshot innovation in your mind in the back. Let your subconscious get to work on it while we get back to the story, because the story was about the moon and this guy. Because this guy was a key to us getting to the moon. Pretty weird, right? But because we needed to go beyond any kind of innovative skill we'd ever reached before, George Land was a psychologist and creativity expert who was assigned to work with the astronauts and scientists at NASA to help them go beyond what they were used to, right? And what he discovered was a little bit startling because these were the best and the brightest, as they've been described, right? The smartest people in the world. And still they struggled to innovate. They tended to go back to the way they did things before. Now, Lamb knew that children were quite creative. Seen that? Anybody here have children? Like 5-year-old children, very creative, right? Very creative. He tested several thousand 5-year-old children and found that 98% of them creative geniuses. Now, you already knew that, right? Here's the bad news. It's not just your kid, right? Okay, so The problem is that when he went back a bit later and tested them 5 years later, same kids, 30% were still at the same level of creativity. So in that 5 years, almost 70% of these children had lost their creativity, but it gets much worse because 5 years later, at the age of 15, 12%. 9 out of 10, roughly, of these children had lost the creativity they already had at 5 years old. It couldn't get much worse than that, right? It could. Among adults, 280,000 of them, not the same ones, 2%. 2% of adults he tested were still as creative as they had been when they were 5 years old. So here's the good news. It's very rare, wouldn't you agree, that in a room of 100 people, we all have something in common. Right? So number one, we have two things in common. Actually, number one, we were all born as creative geniuses. Congratulations. It's how we learn, right? In fact, I personally would say, as someone who studied this stuff, that creativity and innovation are what is most human about human beings. It is the thing that distinguishes us from all other creatures. My dog does not create and innovate, right? He just doesn't. I do. You do. We love to find solutions to things. Second thing we all have in common, we've all lost our creativity. Not as good, but at least, something we can share. Why do we lose our creativity? Everybody knows this, right? Sir Ken Robinson gave the most watched TED Talk of all time, How Schools Kill Creativity. And we know this, right? It's pretty simple. Schools are basically machines, factories to make us all conform. Yes? We all sit at desks in straight lines. We do things the way we're told. We have one answer to every question. No two answers, not five. One answer is right, the rest are wrong. That's the way it's always been, right? Now, schools are changing. They've changed a little bit over time. But generally, we all accept that school is probably one of the big reasons this happens. But what we overlook is that schools are perfectly aligned with society. Our society had a demand for the kind of people it needed, and it invented the schools. And here's the problem. For years and years, what's the best way to succeed? Learn how to do it, right? Somebody said this a bit earlier. School teaches us not like how to learn, right? Learn how to do something and then do it the way it was always done. That's how you succeed. If you do that well enough, you can become a consultant, right? So that has changed, though. And that's a big problem because Oswald Spengler, this is an interesting point, side point, wrote a book called The Decline of the West over 100 years ago, in which he said that 2% of all people in a society are needed to be creative. The rest are not needed to be creative. Interesting that that's 2%, isn't it? 50 years before George Land's study. But it's changed. As I said, Alvin Toffler wrote a book the year after the moon landing, published it, called Future Shock, in which he pointed out that change had become so quick, the rate of technological change, the rate of how things were moving in the world, that people were getting sick with a disease he called future shock. And the prognosis for how to solve this disease was adaptability. We all had to become adaptable. We all had to learn to unlearn and relearn quickly. In fact, he said adaptability would soon become more important than literacy. Reading and writing would no longer be as important as our ability to adapt. Rate of change is not slowing down. We heard about this in the first talk today, right? The rate of change of information propagation. 1900, it was approximately every 100 years we doubled the amount of information in the world. By Toffler's time, 1970, it had reached somewhere between every year to 2 years. Today, they estimate it's about once every 12 hours, twice a day. So by the time you go to sleep tonight, the information in your world will have doubled. Internet of Things is a big part of this, like we heard about that earlier too. And yet, our success at adapting doesn't seem to be changing successfully. And I think that's because of a third S. And that, forgot this one. This is the kind of quotes we get from business today, right? LinkedIn says this: there's no better investment you can make today than strengthening your creative skills. They call creativity the most important skill in the world, and yet, we're not achieving it. So, there's a third S that I think is at the root of this, and I kind of brought it up from the beginning of my story, and that is self. See, we all learn that we need to become a strong, firm, assertive human being, right? Anybody here want to be mushy and change yourself from time to time. When someone tells you something, you change who you are. Anybody want to do that? It's a shame because that's how we need to be. Not mushy necessarily, right? But being a firm, assertive person who knows who you are means you're not adaptable. Because here's the one thing that I learned sitting in the mountains there, thinking about my life. I realized how much I constantly make judgments about things. I make judgments, and then I stick with them. And that sticking has me stuck. And in fact, I suffered for a long time being unable to make judgments, couldn't make decisions, and that was terrible because I couldn't make judgments. If you think about it, human beings, we are like judgment machines, right? Like all day long we judge things. How many times have you judged something since this morning, since I started talking a few minutes ago? We're really good at it. In fact, we're probably the one thing we're better at than being creative, is making judgments. So what I'm saying is that what I realized in the mountains there is that I didn't have an addictive personality, I was addicted to my personality. And the way to become adaptable, I started to realize, is to start to let go of that addiction. Now, I think it's worth taking a moment to just pause and look at what I mean by creativity and innovation. Because I have a slightly different definition than some people. Creativity is thinking differently from yourself. Right? It's okay to think differently than others, but it's not really sufficient. If you keep thinking the same way over and over again for your whole life, you're probably not going to succeed at dealing with the issues you're facing from time to time, right? Things change. The problems you're addressing need to be addressed from where they need to be addressed, not from where you sit. Yeah? This is why we have the experiences often of struggling to overcome things. Because we try to solve the things from the place we are stuck. And the problem we have with that is that that saying, thoughts become things? It's from The Secret, and some other people say thoughts become things. Well, the thing is, before they become thoughts, they start with being, our identity. Our identity is what creates our thoughts before they can become things. You cannot have ideas that you would not have. I can't have the ideas that this gentleman here has. He's him, I'm me, right? So if we approach every challenge in our lives with the same self we came to the last one with, we end up stuck. What is innovation? Innovation is just creativity in action. We like to complicate it. We call all these different types of innovation: open innovation, closed innovation, up innovation, down innovation, all the kinds of innovations you can find in corporate environments. All innovation is the creativity in action, the ability to act differently from yourself. So, creativity, innovation, two parts of one process. Same thing, thinking and acting. Right? You start confronting a problem, you end by hopefully sorting the problem out. And here is how simple that process actually is. This is not a technical diagram, right? But it's a conceptual one. There's 3 steps to the creative process. We perceive things. In other words, we take them in, right, as data. We think about them, conceive, and we spit them back out. We express them. So that's what we're doing all the time. It's that simple. Conceive. After we perceive, we conceive. After we conceive, we express. Then we loop back to the beginning. Every time you have a conversation with somebody, every time you're writing an email, you're doing this endlessly, over and over again. Okay? Except, yours looks a bit more like this. Because we all perceive things through our identity. Like I realized, again, sitting in that rehab, that I didn't see things clearly. I saw things the way I had learned to see them. I saw my life was a failure when, in fact, it wasn't. I'd been, in this country for over 10 years at that time, was a dual citizen, had won a bunch of awards, but to me I was a failure. My daughter was never going to speak to me again, and I was never going to get anywhere. My future was done. That was just my impression, my idea, right? Do y'all see how your identity colors your perceptions? It also colors your decision-making, your expression. All of it is blocked by your identity. Now, children don't have this problem. Children perceive things a lot more cleanly because they don't have the identity in the way. And that's why I like to say this. If a toddler had the mind of an adult, she would never learn to walk. She'd still be sitting on the floor going, this is not me. I'm not good at this. I've fallen down like 25 times, right? I'm sure I could learn this eventually, but it's just not something I'm good at. That's the way we think. Now, how do we get over this addiction? Do you guys see what I'm talking about when I say I'm addicted to myself? Anybody here start to see that maybe you are too? You can raise your hand if you kind of see it, even a little bit. Okay? So, here's the thing, simple. You want to get over the addiction yourself, it begins with step one. And as I said, as someone who's gone through the process of step work and addiction, step one is simple. You have to get over the delusion. Right? There's two steps, two parts to step one, to what addiction is about. Addiction is number one, that you can't stop doing the thing, right? Impulsively keep being the same person, that's addiction to yourself. Number two, you are deluded. Here's the delusion. My opinion is real, yours is just your opinion. Right? There's 8 billion opinions out there, but mine is the true one. Delusion. How do we start to let go of these filters? It's very simple. We see them. We give up the delusion. The minute we see the filters are there and that our perceptions are not real and that it is blocking our ability to be creative, we can start to release them. Then we start to play with our identity, right? That's why I say this. The most important innovation you'll ever make is to innovate yourself. All you have to do, next time you catch yourself saying, that's just not me, remember you don't want to end up on the floor sucking your thumb and crawling, right? Stop yourself and say, that can be me. The aim is to adapt our identity to meet the needs of the challenges we're facing, right? And that will help us become adaptable. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but it is simple. Children do it all the time. You've never seen a 5-year-old child, right, crumpling up their drawing and saying, this isn't good enough. Don't put this on the fridge, right? So, all I'm saying is this, okay? However you need to be to reach your moonshot, you have been that way at some point. You have been that way. When I thought that my daughter would never speak to me, turns out today she's graduating from high school, and when I leave here, I'm going straight to that event. And if I had believed what I told myself, then my life would have been over. It would have been true. But instead, I actually got lucky. And my personality traits, my personality quirks were what saved me. But, you know, a lot of the time, often that being who I need to be will save the day, rather than being who I already am. So my request to you is very simple today. If you see that overcoming your your addiction to yourself could help you be more creative, which it can, just have a look at who you need to be to reach your moonshot. And then be that person. Because you can be. Because we have the infinite ability, we created ourselves, and we can recreate ourselves. So please, go out today and be who you need to be to achieve your dreams. Thank you.